Okay.
Morning, everybody. We'll start at 10 o'clock. Thanks.
Now let's just do it through chat when we get there. If I can't get the authority, it's all good. We'll make it through.
Okay.
Hey, Chelsea,
Yes, ma'am.
do you see the polls
I can't
tab
add
at the
a
top
poll.
or not?
No, I have the authority on the kinds of teams that I can create, but because it's y'all's team, I'm restricted access.
Okay. I think it's because I just added it and it told me there was an error, but I see it. And you can do a new poll, but I think it's because we have to add that process to before the meeting starts.
And I built a poll in one of my other teams and I couldn't access it here. Oh well.
Okay, so I guess I'll have to do it a different way.
Oh wait, let's see.
My apologies to everybody.
Yeah, unable to reach out.
I'll make sure they're on the future ones.
Add a little spice to our training sessions.
Exactly.
All righty. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming today to our next session in the series. BCA, it will be the BCA session. And we have one of our fantastic team members from Widow Bryan that'll be presenting the session today. Thank you, Chelsea. And my name is Hal O'Brien. I'm the Hazard Mitigation Specialist for Nevada Division of Emergency Management. Once again, welcome, and I will hand it over to Chelsea.
Thanks, Hal, and thanks, Janelle. All right, let's get started. Let's just make sure that this part works. Can everyone maybe drop into the chat what you are most excited about for our holiday break that is coming up here? Is it pie? Is it a tree? Is it presents? What kind of things are you excited about? If you're getting real adventurous, there are some cool emojis. So let's just see if that will work. I want to make sure that. Let's see. All right, let's try that. I'm going to drop one in myself. Can everybody see my little GIF? Anybody else? Can we please drop something into the chat here? What are you excited about? Road trip! Yay! Perfect. This is foreshadowing for things to come. Oh, yes, nice sleep. Yes, that would be nice. I have a 4-month-old in the house, so that little sleep is going to come in 30-minute chunks. Perfect. All right. Thank you all. Okay, yes, foreshadowing for more pop quizzes to come. Awesome. All right, so let's get started on, oh my gosh, that's a very cute little GIF you've put in there. Perfect. All right, we're going to kick it off. We're going to go over some BCA basics, one of the delightful aspects of a hazard mitigation application. So today we're going to cover what is cost effectiveness. We're going to review the BCA toolkit. We're going to talk about some getting started pieces. We're going to go through a couple examples, and we're also going to talk about best practices. So first of all, what is cost effectiveness? This is from the HMA guidance that generally the cost effectiveness of hazard mitigation projects is assessed through a BCA, the qualitative analysis that compares the project's avoided future damage to the costs over the project lifetime, and all hazard mitigation activities must be cost effective. So considering that cost effectiveness at the earliest possible stage of the decision-making process can facilitate project scoping and improve project design. It's an important piece, and it's something that they ask you to do right at the very beginning. Certain activities are exempt from proving their cost effectiveness. So that includes the management costs. We all know it's not cost effective to do paperwork. So they do not require a cost effective review for management costs. The planning activities, if you remember back from the eligibility project types, the 5% initiatives, codes and standards activities. These are things that we don't need to prove that there's a reason to do them because they're just a good idea. Partnerships, technical assistance, earthquake warning, early warning sirens. All of these are just immediate application submission. You are exempt. Okay. Pre-calculated benefits. If you remember from last week, this is where the cost effectiveness of that project type has already been determined by FEMA. The key behind this is that if your project is less than or equal, the costs are less than or equal to the numbers already established by FEMA, you don't have to do another thing. You just say you're using pre-calculated benefits, you're copying off FEMA's homework, and for the project types that are listed here, you have a get out of jail free card. As a reminder, again, those pre-calculated benefits, these are the two types that I thought might be most applicable here today. Again, those post-wildfire treatments. So let's say you're doing a project to reseed ground cover. As long as your project is, let's say you're doing 100 acres, your project is $380,000, less than $380,000 for that 100-acre treatment, that 38 times 100. As long as you're less than or equal to that, you just say you're using you're using the pre-calculated benefits, and you don't have to do any other homework. So these are the post-wildfire pre-calculated benefits, and that means you don't have to do anything extra. All right, hospital generators. Again, the pre-calculated benefits for this type of project type means if you are less than or equal to these costs, get out of jail free card. Pre-calculated benefits. All right, benefit cost analysis. Let's get into the actual meat of this. First things first, when you are attempting to do your benefit cost analysis, you first need to download the toolkit. So there is a website here. You can see on the website snip that we have here that there are installation instructions. There's some notes from when that was first released, and then this BCA toolkit version 6.0. This is an Excel-based file. So once you download it, it will open up in Excel, and you do it from Excel. It doesn't look like Excel when you get into the actual add-on and application. For those of us who maybe are not familiar with all of the variety of things that Excel can do, it's going to be a little bit crazy, but those instruction notes are there to help you get through that installation process. It can be done, but you just have to follow the steps there. As a warning to anyone with a hyper-vigilant IT department, you may have some administrative requirements. You might have to fight with IT a little bit to be able to get this to download, but just know that you need to go through that step of downloading, installing, accessing ahead of time so that you're not, 24 hours from a submission deadline and trying to get the BCA to open. If you need help, FEMA has some sites that are available or some resources that are available to help you. There is a phone number and there is an email helpline. If you have issues downloading, if you have issues, now again, if it's your internal IT issue downloading, that's on you. You're going to have to coordinate with your IT. FEMA cannot help with that. But if you're having issues accessing the toolkit, or if you're having issues navigating the toolkit, there is some BCA help. Keep also in mind that when we are around federal, national level deadlines, that hotline can get real hot. So just, again, try to think ahead of time before you're at the crunch time and call or email if you need some help. When you get into Excel, this little add-on bucket here, this is what you're going to see, that button at the top of the Excel page, all the way over to your right, to your right. It'll be right at the top there. That's the button that you press to get started. So let's get started. All right. Once you click that little add-on button, this is the page that you're going to see. It'll look like a normal Excel spreadsheet with this inside of it. And you're going to be pushing this little open calculator button to actually open up the first page of the BCA. Once you click that button, you're going to see this tab where it says Add Project. This is where you get started. I'm pointing this out to you because when you're looking at it in all of its gray and blue and white glory, you might not know where to initially put your eyes. And that Add Project is where you're going to get started. That's where you're going to click. See, we've got a quick question. Do you have any suggestions or tips for agencies who IT blocks addition of add-ins to their Excel? I've suggested some have used their personal home computers. That can help. Or IT was able to give us access even though it is blocked for the state, but I don't know how they did it. Yes, definitely contact your administrator. So if you have some of those, this is what I'm saying, that coordination, internal coordination with your IT department can be real critical in getting access. This is also why I say use Google Chrome when you are downloading from the grants.gov site, because Google Chrome is like the only one that site likes. For some of you, you might have been blocked from Google Chrome on your computer because your IT department doesn't like Google Chrome. So it's one of those things where you're going to have that fight with your internal IT department to get the add-in, to get the Google Chrome, to get those downloads. So give yourself enough time to have that conversation, to get some time with your IT, to get your access to these kinds of things. Yeah, personal computer is a good workaround. If you don't have that option open to you, it's a fight with the IT department. See if they can give you like a decommissioned laptop that they don't mind, that's like separated from the network. You might have to email yourself this spreadsheet, but however you need to get that workaround, there are some hurdles, let's say. So when you sit down to get started on this BCA, first you need to, like the first number, the thing that you need to have in front of you when you sit down to do the BCA is your total costs. So for a lot of you here who are working through the application, getting that number of what it's going to cost, there's a whole process, there's a whole saga that has gone into establishing what those costs include. And that whole saga has to be done before you sit down to do the BCA. You cannot just have the construction cost. You cannot just have the admin cost. You need to have the whole piece, the whole kit and caboodle. And it needs to include all of what you expect FEMA to cover and all of your match. Again, the whole pie. Put your pie in front of you before you get started. So that number is the first piece that you want to set down on your plate when you get started with the BCA. A couple of terms to go over before we get into the first example, just so that we're all on the same page. Project usefulness life. For anyone who has stood there in the middle of a Walmart trying to figure out if you should buy a pair of shoes, the idea behind this is this. Do you spend $20 on a pair of shoes that's going to last a year? Or do you spend $100 on a pair of shoes that might last you 10 years? So as you're doing that own calculation in your own life, the project usefulness life is how long is that thing, once you purchase it, going to last? Because when you think about that, $100 over 10 years, that's $10 a year. I'm spending $10 a year on those shoes. Whereas if you're spending $20 for a pair of shoes, it's only going to last you 1 year, and you're going to have to do that every year for 10 years, you're spending $20 every year. So when you weigh it that way, do you spend $20 over here, and then you're going to spend it, or $10 a year over here for 10 years? That one is the more cost beneficial option. Even though it's a higher dollar figure up front, you're going to benefit over the long run because you're going to save. It's about 50% less. You're going to save more in the long run. So that project usefulness life is the lifetime of the project. How long is it going to last you? In terms for wildfire mitigation, if you are doing a treatment on grass, that project usefulness life is shorter because that grass is going to grow back, maybe 1 year, maybe 3 years, depending on the species. But that's a shorter life. That's a project usefulness life that is shorter than if you were treating like canopy trees up in the mountains, which might take 25 years, might take 50 years for that level of vegetation to come back. So that's how, when you're doing when you're picking the project usefulness life, you're trying to figure out how long is that treatment going to last me. A reoccurrence interval, this is the one that trips me up every time. It is I'm going to read it. How often a hazard event of a specific severity is likely to occur in a particular location. The one that's easiest for me to remember is the floodplain, because we've got this 1% annual chance, or the 0.5, the 500-year flood event, the 100-year flood event. That recurrence interval, that's why we call it a 0.1% chance, a 1% chance, 0.1% chance, 0.25% chance. That recurrence interval, that number can be assigned to each hazard. It's how you determine that severity and how likely it is to occur. It should be specific to the hazard the project is mitigating, and then there's a wind retrofit example. So that is when we get into it, the recurrence interval is that severity, that level of the hazard. How likely is that level to come back? Sometimes you hear this in terms of like how likely you are to flood over a 30-year mortgage. So like there's many different ways to conceptualize how frequently that hazard is going to come back. But that recurrence interval is going to be key when we get into the numbers later on. The damages before mitigation. So what I want you to think of when we talk about damages before mitigation is, if you did nothing right now, what are the bad things that are going to happen over that usefulness life? So let's say the usefulness life is a 50-year project. So 50 years, what are all the bad things that we can document and confirm and estimate to the best of our ability? What are all the what's the dollar figure we're going to lose over that 50-year period? And the damages after mitigation is, if we do the cool project, if we get the money, if it all goes right, what are we still going to lose over that 50-year period? Because you have to think, if we don't do this project, my culverts are going to fill up with sediment. I'm going to lose that bridge. The houses are going to flood bad. But if we do the project, I'm still going to have to go out there on a bad day and maybe clean them out. Or I might lose a portion of that culvert, or I might have some damages after mitigation. They should be less than if we did nothing. I mean, because we're doing all this project for something. But there still might be something that happens that is going to cause a cost later down the road. So those are some terms to know as we get into this example. Okay, example time. All right. This is a bite. This is something that you can kind of sink your teeth into with the BCA. We're going to get into flood in a little bit, where I'm going to talk about all of the different paths that we can branch down. But this generator example is something we can kind of sink our teeth into before we move on to some of the more complex concepts. Okay, so in this example, we've got a fire station with a 400 kilowatt generator on a concrete pad. The project cost is $385,000 and the annual maintenance cost is $5,000. So that's like your regularly scheduled maintenance. It's the oil, the stuff that you're going to need to do to keep it alive. So that's our project description. And here are some other pieces of information. So we've got, on our table, the project cost. That's the first thing that we put in front of us, that stack of documentation. So we've got that ready to go. Here are some other pieces of information you're going to need to know going into that BCA. So that fire, in this example, it serves an urban population of 20,000. So you're going to need to know the people that are being served by that station. The fire station A, which is one we're trying to get the generator for, is 5 miles from fire station B, which is the nearest fire station. So it's the nearest facility that performs the same function. You're going to need to know that. Fire stations A and B both provide emergency medical services. So you're going to, if the fire station A is an EMS station, fire station B, you'll either need to say it is or it isn't, because that will have a different value to the community. So basically, if fire station A goes down, fire station B can still provide all the same functions or not. If fire station A goes down and your EMS can't run, fire station B cannot provide that same service. So that is a piece of information that needs to be known. And fire station A, has gathered documentation of historical outage data. So they know that fire station, it went down in 2022 for 0.75 days. This is said this way for a reason, but that's essentially like 18 hours. In 2020, it went down for half a day, 12 hours. And in 2018, it went down for 0.25 days, which would be like 6 hours. If you have smaller outage windows, just know that you're going to have to talk about that in days, periods of days, and then select the percentage of that day. All right, so those are the pieces of information that we have already on our desk, laid out in front of us. Costs, all of these pieces of information, and your past damages. That's what's on your table when you go into the BCA. Okay, so once you've clicked that little add project button up in the top, this is the thing that's going to greet you when you go into your BCA. So you start off with your project title. Again, I'm just going to say this out loud. All of your documentation across your application and your benefit cost analysis and your budget narrative and your scope of work, all of it need to have a similar title. There needs to be consistency among your applications. And remember, particularly, for an HMGP post-fire application, we kind of know who you all are and what you're doing. But if you're submitting that project for a national competition, a national award, flood project is not going to be specific. Saying something like, the Reno culvert project, something along those lines. But also consider how many Reno flood projects are you going to have over the next 5 years. So consider a title for your project that tells you where you are, what you're doing, and any helpful identifiable information, a specific road crossing, or if you just say what we've got here, HMGP fire station generator, that is not going to tell us who is doing this project and where that generator is located. So it's going to be a little bit hard to pinpoint if we've got a mix up of documentation. So just as a consideration, maybe put in your title here a little bit more specific than what you've got here and make that title consistent across all of your documentation. This location, you can see here, there are 2 different pieces put in here. If you start typing an address, it will auto-populate the rest of this information for you. But you can also toggle it over here to use latitude and longitude if you're out in the middle of the desert or if you're in a place that doesn't have a location like that. Go to Google Maps, find it, drop a pin, copy paste the latitude and longitude, paste it in here to find your location. All good. For this particular exercise, in this example, we're doing a critical facility building, the fire station, and we're going to select the uncategorized hazard because there is could be infrastructure failure, but we're going to select uncategorized because the power could go out for a variety of different reasons. So uncategorized. It's a generator. And for the purposes of this example, we're clicking historical damages. We'll get more into that a little bit later. Historical, think past, bad things have happened in the past. So we're going to talk about the bad things that happened in the past. All right, when you get down, so that's the first part. Underneath that is this second section on page 1. There's 2 pages to this. Page 1, all that project information at the top, and then at the bottom is this little information here. This is where your project useful life is going to come in to play, and where you might think, well, how long is it supposed to last? If you don't know, or you want to use a FEMA standard, you click this little icon here at the top, and it gives you a beautiful table of all the different types of projects that FEMA has assessed, and it gives you a standard value. So for a generator, 19 years, you use FEMA standard value and you move on with your day. If you cannot find your project type, or if you want to use something different, documentation, documentation, documentation. If you want to disagree with FEMA, you have to provide enough backup documentation to support your decision that FEMA agrees with you over their, 50, 20, 30 years of documented, data collection and statistical analyses and, all of these people that have put in all these efforts to make these project usefulness life tables. So you can do something different. But if you're going to argue with FEMA, you better be able to back up your reasoning. So standard values are in this table. Click that little icon button. There's a couple of different resources in there. Click the one for the project usefulness life and just pull, if you can, pull the standard value from that table. Your initial project costs, again, that was that first thing you put on your table. You're going to put that project cost into the cost. The number of maintenance years, this is going to be the same as your usefulness life. So for this case, the generator, you buy a generator, you expect it to last 19 years. But just like a car, you can't just buy it and then never service it. You're going to have to get tires. You're going to have to change the oil. You're going to have to da-da-da-da-da-da. So the maintenance cost for that generator, you're going to need to identify how many staff people am I going to need to check on this thing? How many times do I have to turn it on and run it? How long is that going to take that staff person? What kind of equipment, servicing? Does it need to be cleaned? Does it need to be, change out a filter? Do I need to add oil? What are all of those maintenance costs in a year? And then basically that number gets multiplied by the project usefulness life. So if it costs you $5,000 a year times 19, that number is going to come in there as well. So number of maintenance years is the same as the project usefulness life, and the annual maintenance cost gets multiplied by that. It's all in the system. There's a whole calculation that goes into that. And so then you get, once you do this, click the button here, it will calculate the total mitigation project cost. This is not the total project cost in your application. You do not want to put that number anywhere else. Don't change your total project cost number. This is for the benefit cost analysis purposes, the number that they're using as the cost of the project. We're trying to get that balance. We're trying to see, are the costs more, so we shouldn't really do the project, or are the benefits so much greater we should do the project? So don't take that number anywhere outside of this. Again, if you decide to not use a FEMA standard value, you got to justify it and you got to back it up with documentation. Whenever you do put a figure in here, so let's say your initial project costs, you want to cite in your application where you got that number. So cite references and locations of all relevant data. Maybe that annual maintenance cost, you have like a little Excel spreadsheet that you built to tell yourself, how many staff people, how many hours, how much is oil going to cost, how much diesel, whatever it is. If you have that little spreadsheet, save that as maintenance cost backup as part of your application and reference it here. Use data from credible and reliable sources. You are a credible and reliable source for the source of your maintenance costs. But if you don't have that information and you want to go to, a provider, a construction company or whatever, a generator provider, and they have pre-calculated the expected maintenance cost on an annual basis, put that in there. Put that piece of documentation. You're going to want to provide copies of reports, data, any other technical information. The BCA gets real complicated. It's easy to just plug a number in and kind of like see what happens and like do a little bit of magic. But if you're going to put a number in, be prepared to back it up. Okay, that's page 1. Those are the costs. Then you get to page 2, where we're going to talk about the benefits. The first thing that you're going to need to identify is, so we're changing the direction of our gaze. So page 1, we're talking about the project. We're talking about like looking at the hazard and that way. Page 2, we're looking at the things we're protecting. So in this situation, we've got one generator on one building. So we're going to talk about the building, the thing that we are protecting. So the year that the analysis was conducted, that's when you're doing the math. So today, 2024, 2025, if you're opening the BCA and kind of playing with it, you can change it to 2025 if you want to, but it's now. That's when you're doing it. That helps FEMA understand when they look back on this in 10 years, when that analysis period started and stopped. The year that the property was built or the year that it was substantially modified. So that will set the lifespan of that particular location. So you need to know when your fire station A was constructed. And the analysis duration is the period of time where we're going to do the math on. So if your building was constructed in 1974, that analysis window is much bigger than if your fire station was constructed in 2015. So we're trying to get an idea of how many years are we going to be dividing this by. Because we clicked historical damages, we are going to, in the next tab down, enter the years where we had damages. So we remember from that first page when we were talking about the setup for the project, 2022, 2020, 2018. And then those same impacts for days is there as well. You can see that we have skipped the reoccurrence interval. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But you can also see that for an impact in 2022 of 0.75 days, that 18 hours, there is a number pre-calculated by FEMA. You don't have to do the math. You just have to plug those numbers in for how much those damages cost you. How much did it cost for that location to go down for 0.75 days? In the BCA toolkit, you either need to have at least one bad day that you know the reoccurrence interval for. So you know the bad day happened, you have damages associated with that, and you know how bad it was, that reoccurrence interval for that event. Or at least 3 where you don't know how bad it was. You don't know the reoccurrence interval. There is a built-in, again, FEMA, this is a real complicated process. They do try to do their best in giving you as much math as they possibly can. So there is this opportunity in there to add in the reoccurrence interval pre-calculated for unknown frequency events. That's in there as well. All right, so we've plugged in all the numbers. We've done all the, three-dimensional chess in our heads. What is our BCA? If you remember back to when we were talking about BCA originally, you need a benefit cost analysis of at least 1-to-1, where the costs are less than or equal to the benefits. We've done all this work. We've gone all the way through this. Our costs are more expensive than our benefits. It's not a passing BCA. Oh no, what do we do? Well, let's consider another option. Same thing that we just did, same generator, we're moving it to professional expected damages. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about these later, but we're changing from, we know bad days happened in the past, this is a historical damage, to, you know what, FEMA, you've done the math. Why don't you tell me how bad it could be? So professional expected damages, the projection of how bad it could be into the future. We're turning our gaze from what has happened to what possibly could happen. So this was updated in 2022 to allow for professional expected damages. Let's see here. And model damages not available. We're going to talk about that later. Okay. So when you go in there, same information, you've done your whole costs, you've done your maintenance, you've done blah, 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 you're down to page 2. There is a pre-filled recurrence interval and impact days. It's already like set up in there. And you just use the FEMA default. You let FEMA tell you what the answer is. The costs are now less than the benefits. The benefits are greater, and we have a passing BCA. Yay! We're ready to move forward. We have proven that putting a generator on this site is going to be cost beneficial. And that's because we're saying, it's the difference between saying it was bad, we know it was bad, we had some bad days, to saying how bad could it be? We are projecting that the future losses could be worse than what we've had in the past. FEMA says it's okay. We're ready to move forward. A couple of pitfalls about generators, because this was on our list here too. Some of the biggest pitfalls include the lack of explanation regarding the basis for the required emergency power generation capacity. If you need for your facility a Volvo and you ask for a Cadillac or a Rolls Royce or something, there is a disconnect. So you need to be able to prove the size and capacity of the generator that you need for that site. Sometimes it's an engineer. You know, I am not an engineer, so I cannot give you advice on how to procure that information, but I will say you need to be able to justify the capacity. If you need a Hummer or whatever, kind of I'm not a car person too. I don't know why I'm using this analogy. If you need one of those like big beefy generators and you really do need it, you just, have documentation that proves that you need the big beefy generator. Incorrect service type for loss of function. That's in those when you're originally selecting which site you want to work on. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Lack of documentation. And then after mitigation damages not included. Remember that when you are doing these calculations, you're still going to have bad days. If you have 1,000-year flood event, like the worst possible day imaginable, and it happened here in Santa Fe in 2017, we had a 1,000-year flood event. People were shocked. I've lived here 50 years. I've never seen. Well, it's a 1,000-year flood event. Of course you haven't seen it. So you have the really bad day. If you have that really bad day again, because it's just, 1,000-year event, you might think it won't come back for another 1,000 years, but there's still a % chance that it could happen every single year. It might not happen very often, but still it could come back, and it could come back tomorrow or next year or in 10 years. So anyway, you have another 1,000-year event. You're not going to weather that completely perfectly. You're not going to just sail through and have nothing else bad happen. You might have to come back and clean it out. You might have to, buy extra fuel that year or whatever. Whatever that after mitigation damages are, you need to make sure you're properly accounting. You can't just say, oh, we're going to do it. It's going to be perfect. We're never going to have to deal with hazards again. That's not realistic. So make sure you're including your after mitigation damages as well. If there's one thing that we can kind of shout, documentation, 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 documentation. Make sure you can back up all your figures. Before I go into the next piece, is there any questions about this aspect or the generators that we've been talking about? Okay, and Janella's reminding us that we have access now to the full suite of the past presentations available for your viewing pleasure. I know you're going to be sharing them around Christmas. Everyone's going to be, all of your families going to be delighted to watch some HMA training videos after your Christmas meals. All right, last call for questions about what we just talked about. Okay. I am not going to get as detailed into the flood mitigation form, and I'll let you know that because it can branch off into a variety of different ways. So essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to lead you to the crossroads and abandon you, where you will be able to figure out what you need to do, where your direction is going to take you. And then if we need to have another technical assistance call one-on-one to kind of triage how to get you down the rest of the pathway, we can do that. So before we talk about what's going into the BCA, the actual completion of it, I want to talk a little bit more about setting that stage. So when you are thinking about the kinds of bad days that can happen in the future, there are a variety of different things. The reason why we're trying to understand the bad days is we're proving to FEMA, I'm going to do this thing. It's going to cost a lot of money, but look at all of the horrible things we're going to avoid by not doing it. Or by doing it. We're going to do the mitigation. We're not going to do the bad stuff. We're going to avoid all of that. So what kind of stuff are we trying to avoid? We're trying to avoid physical damage. So damage to structures, loss of those facilities, loss of the usage of those facilities, loss of the contents of those facilities, commercial structures, residential structures, critical infrastructure, roads, bridges, like what is going to be damaged by the bad day? The loss of service, like I was saying, the usage of those things, injury or death. We want to avoid the bad things from impacting our population. Displacement costs. If that place is damaged, I have to go to a different place because I can't use that place. So we want to avoid that displacement cost. And we want to avoid the emergency management response costs because it's very costly to have to run out at 12 a.m., 12 a.m. on a Christmas Eve to go deal with an emergency. We want to avoid that. We want to do a big thing here and avoid all the bad days. Okay, so this is a plain. This is like a plain BCA. I want to talk about this. So when you get into here, you're going to enter your title, you're going to enter your location, or you're going to drop your latitude and longitude, and then you're going to be able to select your structure type. So these are all of the structure types that are in the BCA. So a residential building, non-residential building, critical facility, utilities, roads and bridges, green infrastructure. Each of these, this is where we're getting to the crossroads. Each of these properties is going to lead you down a slightly different path. Some of them might be very similar, some of them might be very different. When you're doing these BCAs, one thing that we've seen is, let's say you're doing an upstream project, and the properties that you're going to be protecting, maybe you have 30 residential structures and a road and a fire station. You are going to enter those as, remember that add property button at the beginning? You're going to enter those as separate properties, so different pages for each of the different structure types. So let's say we get started on the residential building. We're going to put in residential building, and then we're going to talk about the 30 residential buildings. Maybe you do individual residential buildings. If you want to get super, I have seen this, a BCA with like 128 properties included, because each of the separate individual properties had their own value, had their own benefits, had their own costs, the whole kit and caboodle. You can do that. If you want to get that nuance, remember that BCA is like a whole career in and of itself. But also remember that, if you don't have to go that far down the path, you don't need to. Try and pick the biggest benefits first. Start from where you know you're going to be able to show the most benefit at the start. So we'll start with roads and bridges. Start with that one. Then we're going to go to the fire station. Then we'll talk about the little properties. Thank you for joining, the person who's jumping. All right, so that's going to lead you down a certain pathway, the property structure type. The other piece, this is not all of the hazard types. I just selected a few highlight ones. When you select a certain property type, some of the hazards are going to be grayed out. So you're not going to have all of these hazard types for all of the structured types. If you get into a situation where you've selected a property and you cannot find the applicable hazard for that property, go uncategorized and then call me if you need help. So we're going to go select the property, and then you're going to select the applicable hazard type. I will say for us out here in the high desert, flash flood Typically, we put that in as uncategorized hazard because FEMA just don't know what to do with us. The hydrology for a flash flood for the lateral erosion banks of 16 feet, they don't even know. They're like, what do you mean it's a sandbox? Yeah, it's a sandbox. So uncategorized hazards. I mentioned before that there is a difference between that model damages, historical damages, and professional expected damages. Everything else after this is going to change depending on which of these buttons you click. And like we saw with the generator application, that model damages is not always available for every hazard type. So what does that mean? So when you're doing flood model damages, it relies on flood hazard data, building characteristics, and depth damage functions. You are going to need to know from a very professional human being where that water is flowing, how fast that water is flowing, how deep the water is going to go. If that is the base flood elevation of that structure, you're going to need to know all of the pieces of engineering that goes into modeling how bad it could be. This is like a professional, like a H&H analysis. You're going to need to have all of that data in order to move forward with model damages. If you're going through historic damages, remember, bad things happened in the past. You're going to need to have your documentation that proves how bad it was. You're going to need to have all of your receipts for your bad days, all of those damages that you had, loss of life, loss of function, loss of structure, anything that you assembled to maybe ask for a presidential disaster declaration, take that packet out. You're going to use that for your historic damages model. If you're going on professional expected damages, like we saw in the generator tool, there are some instances where FEMA has done the homework for you and they are expecting damages and they're giving you those numbers. Otherwise, you might need to provide documentation to those effects. If you have done your own studies, evaluations that project how bad it could be, you might be able to use the professional expected damages with your own data and documentation. But again, documentation, broken record, documentation. Historic, professional, both those, the historic and professional expected damage methodology is used more often for flood proofing because it generally requires less data collection and may better represent the complexity of some flood proofing projects. So if you can get away with the historic damages or the professional expected damages, don't feel like you have to go after modeled. Maybe look at those first, run that preliminary analysis before you decide to go off and get a little bit more complicated. This is what I mean by more complicated. So in this analysis, I think we selected, let me double check. Hazard probability parameters. I think this is the model. I can't remember what I selected on this, but it gives you a snapshot of the kinds of data that you need to put in here. You can see the reoccurrence interval has been established for us. So I might have selected the professional expected damages. I wanted to just give you a snapshot of all of the little fields that open up when you get to page 2, because page 2 is super complicated and you need to have a lot of data documentation. Every field that you enter on page 2, some on page 1 as well, but every field on page 2 needs to have supporting documentation. So in this particular analysis, we've selected a structure type, we've selected the model, we've put in our total project cost, we've put in our maintenance for the project, enter the lowest floor elevation of the property. Do you have that information? Because you're going to need it. Enter the stream bed elevation at the property location. I think I might have selected model damages on this one to show you how it does get kind of intense. Default reoccurrence interval. So FEMA is giving you information. Do you want to use their default? Always yes, unless you have a really good reason for no. Including the future precipitation impacts, selecting, they have these scenarios preset for you. And then again, use their default unless you have a good reason not to. And then you have to put in the surface elevation, the discharge, like all of this is from that those model damages, your H&H analysis. You're going to have to include all of this information for these reoccurrence intervals. Okay. Building information. So you're going to need to know about the site that you're protecting. I selected critical infrastructure. So let's pretend that we're protecting that fire station. You can select a damage curve. You have to enter the first floor, your building size, the building replacement value, which might be assessed by your county assessor, but there might be a better number, a more applicable number if the number that the county assessor has is not correct, or a full picture of what your losses might look like if you lose that particular site. So you've got your square foot building replacement value, and then that gets calculated. So there's a calculation that occurs there, an automatic calculation by FEMA. And then there's some numbers in here too. This is where you see that expected annual losses to building damages before mitigation. So that's all the bad days that we are trying to avoid. And then the after mitigation is the stuff that we still have to deal with even when we do the project. So remember, before mitigation is the future that we think is going to happen, the bad days that we think are coming. And after mitigation is, we got a little bit of cleanup we still have to do. Other kinds of tabs, I didn't want to put all the tabs on here for you, but other kinds of information that pop up when you're in this model, you have contents, the value, the expected annual loss due to content damages before mitigation, after mitigation. You have displacement, the monthly cost of temporary space, again, expected before and after. You have the loss of function and loss of income. So let's say you're working with a retail center. So you're doing your flood mitigation upstream and there's a retail center down below. There's a loss of income, or a community center might have a loss of income or loss of use, loss of function for those particular sites. There's a cost to the community by losing something that is part of your community. If applicable, volunteer costs, if applicable, ecosystem services. So basically, let's say as part of this drainage project that you're doing upstream or this thing you're doing, you're going to convert some of it to wildland habitat or something. You're trying to get sinuosity. You're trying to slow the flow down. You're trying to get that sediment to drop out so it's not moving quite so much. You can get a little calculation, a little extra dollar figure for all of those beneficial ecosystems that you're putting in upstream as well. So this is what I mean by I'm leading you down to the path and then abandoning you. I'm moving over into best practices after this. As far as the flood models about, the model damages, historic damages, professional expected damages, the different structures and the different hazard types, does anyone have any questions about any of the nonsense I just said? Yes, go right ahead.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So I have a question about how do you maximize those ecosystem services? Is there a list? Do you get more benefits if you say, okay, we're going to build this detention basin that also provides habitat, but also could be used as recreation, that could also XYZ, like?
Yes, in the standard benefits that you have on there, the ecosystem benefits, you basically select from a list and it will give you get a certain percent. Basically, let's say you have 100 acres you're working on. You can say what percentage of that 100 acres is going towards that ecosystem. So in that regard, it's a little bit limited. There is a green infrastructure project type as well. So when you go to do your BCA, one thing that you can do is you can add all of your costs to a single project type. So let's say you're doing the flood mitigation. You put your whole project cost and the bridge that you're going to protect in there. Then you add another project that has no extra cost because you already calculated for all the costs, but you're just going to calculate the benefits. You can click green infrastructure, and in there are things like urban trees, I can't even remember all of them, like impermeable surfaces. They now allow for all of those other benefits as well. If there is not an established benefit to what you're trying to do, we can maybe talk about like how to incorporate that, or it might end up being like a narrative good idea where it maybe isn't so representative in the BCA. That's really important for like the brick projects and trying to get as many points as possible. So I would highly suggest getting into the BCA tool and playing around to see if you can find what you're looking for if you select the green infrastructure option.
Great. I have one more question.
Yeah.
So one of the counties that we work with has talked about the area that we're currently doing a scoping project, but hope to apply for a construction project, is that their census tract does not, it's large and it does not reflect the actual community. Because, you know, it's such a rural area, the actual community is disadvantaged, but because it's part of a larger census tract, it doesn't show up thus. So is there some way in the BCA to reflect that?
This would be one of those situations where if FEMA's default is not working for you, then you can select to go outside that. So basically in that circumstance, you would need to prove that they are disadvantaged and by what criteria. That might be like a narrative or a report or something. Like there might be some backup documentation we'll need to talk about, like how to assemble that justification. It does not mean FEMA is going to give you the points, maybe if it did meet FEMA's criteria, but they might be more encouraged to select the project. That goes on to that sort of programmatic side. The BCA is more focused on like technical feasibility. And so it's a lot like more cut and paste. Like they won't, or cut dry. They won't be as flexible, but narratively and programmatically, that stuff can be make or break as far as like qualitative and selection, the quality of your application. Right. That can go there. Yeah. Unfortunately, that kind of difference, if you're going to argue with FEMA, it's just easier not as far as technical goes, but absolutely argue your case programmatically.
Right. Thank you.
Absolutely. Anybody else questions on anything we've talked about here? I've got some best practices and then I have a couple questions for you. Let me just double check. Chat box. Okay, perfect. All right, some quick best practices. A lot of this we've talked about already, but just for reminder purposes, when you go to attach your BCA to your application, when you're ready to send it out, put in both the Excel, like the manipulatable version, and the report. There's going to be a button in there where you can generate a little report. It gets a nice little printout. Give FEMA both. FEMA's going to want to play with your numbers. They're going to want to see how you got certain things. Just give them both the Excel and the report and a narrative. If you need to tell a story that backs up and a lot of times you do, put in a narrative, put all of your supporting attachments. That BCA alone can sometimes be that big stack of papers. So make sure that everything that goes with the BCA is put in. Don't just attach the report. You're going to get immediately, they're going to get bad. So put everything that you can into that application. Use data from credible sources, like I said. Make sure you're backing up your documents. Provide the copies in the backup documentation if you're referencing anything like your digital flood insurance rate map. Provide justification for all of the inputs if you're not using a FEMA standard value. Cite your references and locations to relevant data, and organize. If you need a table of contents for your data, do that. If you need to reference it by a number, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, 3.3, whatever it is, A, B, C, D, make sure you're organized and FEMA can find what they're looking for. Here are a couple of tips. If you run your BCA and it is not cost effective, there's a couple of different things you can try. You can try to change the number of scenario events. So like add more events. The more events that are included, the more benefits will be calculated. So maybe you were down for a whole day, but maybe you've been down for like an hour 19 times in the last year. Put in all those times because then it'll show that you are being impacted more frequently. Determine it, like I said, more smaller frequency events. Determine if there are additional benefits. Maybe you put in the bridge and you put in the fire station. You're like, well, I got to do the houses too. And ensure that the most recent data is included in the BCA. All right, I'm going to actually kind of quickly go through this part because I want to be able to ask my question for you guys. Again, we are here as a resource. Myself, Matt, Aaron, we're available to you. Our information's all over the place. This is what I wanted to get to real quick before everybody has to drop. We're going to skip the next 2 sessions because it's the holidays and nobody wants to come do this on their lovely vacation with their kids screaming around them. So we're going to skip. We intend to resume these training sessions on January 9th, but we would like to get your feedback. If you could drop into the chat any of the things that you'd like to talk. Well, this is where we're going to do the poll. If you would like more of a deep dive on the environmental and historic preservation, EHP, drop EHP. If you'd like more information on floodplain management, NFIP, CRS, CFM, special flood hazard area, the DFIRMs. If you want us to do more information on any application development, is there any topic we've covered but didn't do a good enough job and you'd like more information? If you want more information on the BCA, if you'd like me to take you down the dark, dark rabbit hole, I can do that. But please give us your feedback on where you feel like you haven't gotten what you need. We're missing some information. It's been too broad, too generic. If you want to go over the BRIC qualitative review criteria, we don't have the 2024 NOFO, but we can talk about what they've done in past years. If you want to learn more about the flood mitigation assistance, if you want to learn about FEMA as a whole, any of the things that you feel like you have not gotten good enough information on, please drop it now or come off mute and let me know what you'd like to hear more about. Let's see. All right, links to prior presentations. Let's see. Janelle, can you give us information on where previous sessions can be accessed? I know you said they've been posted. Endem YouTube. Hey, Hal.
Oh yeah, I was going to answer that. Yeah.
Can you drop the link in the chat and then I can look at them?
Oh, Janelle's on it too.
Okay.
That would be great. All right. And as just for future reference, there are some links to some assistance. Like I said, the installation instructions, the release notes, some guidance provided by BCA on how to do the streamlined BCA, just like a nuanced thing. And again, as a reminder that there are a lot of lovely resources if you're planning on submitting a notice of interest or an application for the currently open funding cycle, or if you're interested in BRIC and FMA when they do come out, and also some of those lovely, lovely resources that are available on the Nevada website. All right. I'm going to hang out here for just a minute if anybody else would like to chat about anything or drop something in the chat, but you guys are all free to go. I hope you have a wonderful, delightful break. I hope everyone gets lots of good rest and have a happy holidays.
Thank you, Chelsea, for that fantastic program on BCA processes and tools. It was very, very helpful. And thank you all for attending today. Really appreciate it. And if you have any questions or any technical assistance from mitigation support from Janelle or myself, information there is provided. So feel free to contact us.
It's in the chat, but it's not working. So I just got that new recap, and when I try to look at it, it says only organization members have access to the meeting recap. And then the next one that has the picture.
Janelle said she's going to drop it in the chat right now. So
okay,
I'm watching the comments. So
okay, looks like you're all sitting in the stadium.
Yeah,
I love it.
It's interesting. I like it.
I hope you're watching something really fun.
Oh yeah, BCA. So just got to get the popcorn. So yeah, I think Janelle's got that for you. I think.
Yeah, let me look at Janelle's. Posted her info. Something recording. It's going to drop the link in the chat. Hang on. Okay. Okay, I'm going to copy these. Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thanks, Janelle. So happy holidays, and we
Ditto.
will see you all on, if you're able to make it, on January 9th for our next session.
Great. Thank you.
All right, everybody take care. Thank you.
Yeah, you too. Happy holidays. Bye-bye.
Same to you. Bye-bye.